Welcome to the dark world of scary stories. A place where every sound is a premonition of the unknown, and every shadow is a step into another dimension. If you're ready to open the door to the scariest secrets, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell, because the scariest is yet to come. Turn on the light and let's beg. Survival game, Shadows in the Dark. A group of friends was sitting in an old, dusty university dormitory when one of them stumbled upon a terrifying game. Its name was unfamiliar, but in the dark corners of the web, it was popular among those seeking unusual entertainment. Live Choice. At first, they laughed at how strange and dangerous it could be, but something inside each of them pushed them to try. After all, who wouldn't want to win a few million, right? They visited the game's website, where it was stated that participants had to complete tasks. Tasks with varying levels of difficulty, from physical exercises to solving puzzles. Completing them could earn enormous sums of money or even prizes they had never dreamed of. But everything began to grow darker with each step they took. They started with simple tasks: finding an object in the library, following a specific route to a particular location, taking a photo in the most remote corner of the campus. First, it was fun and easy. However, with each new task, more strange requirements appeared on the screen. The next instruction was very vague. Kill the one in front of you, the message on the screen read. At first, they thought it was just some kind of joke, a reaction test, until they saw that their computer's camera started recording them. The person who received the message noticed a photo of another group member appeared on their screen. A real photo, not one taken by the webcam. "What is this nonsense?" one of them shouted. "It's just some kind of manipulation scheme." But the messages kept coming. "Kill instantly. You can see what they are thinking. The choice is yours." That's when they realized this wasn't just a game. And there were no prizes. They were being played like puppets on strings, forced to perform increasingly sinister and dangerous actions. By the next day, when they woke up, it was already too late. The game began assigning real tasks that they had to carry out, not as puzzles or quests, but as directly dangerous and bloody instructions. They were forced to choose who to kill, who to torture, who to destroy. And with each choice, they felt weaker because the game knew their deepest fears, their greatest weaknesses. Each day, the next task became even more difficult. Someone disappeared suddenly, another began acting more and more strangely. Fear consumed them from within. And it seemed like the game saw every move they made, heard every thought they had. That's when they realized this game didn't just hold them captive, it could predict their future moves. Every action, every choice, every decision they made was recorded like in a horror film, where they were not the heroes, but mere helpless figures. Then, one of them, a girl named Lisa, received a message that would change everything. "You know what happens next. Kill the one you love most. You can't escape yourself." Panic gripped her as she looked at her friends. How was this possible? How could the game know about her relationship with her best friend, Mika? How could it know that he was her only protection, her only hope of escaping this hellish trap? She couldn't explain how she became part of this nightmare game, but she knew one thing for sure: they had all become puppets in the hands of something or someone far greater than they could ever imagine. With every new message, they fell deeper into the trap. The tasks grew more brutal, and the fear at their backs never left them for a second. Each of them tried to run, but it turned out you couldn't simply stop the game without completing all its conditions. They had survived the worst. Little did they know, the game was only just beginning. Lisa sat on the floor in the dark room, breathing deeply, trying to calm herself. However, her heart was racing with every beat, every sound. Something was wrong. She felt as if the room itself was watching her. If it weren't for this game, everything could have been different. They sat together in the dorm, once again gathered in a circle, staring at their laptop screens. The tasks grew darker with each passing moment, each step leading to a new horrifying situation. The messages that came through gave them no chance for rest. Meanwhile, Mika looked increasingly nervous. His gaze was vacant, and in his eyes, one could see the light from the laptop reflecting off his pupils, as if he was no longer himself. "This isn't just a game," he said, his voice cracking, as if his chest couldn't hold it back any longer. "This is something else. We don't have a choice. We're not here by accident." Lisa couldn't help but notice. Her skin grew cold, and she felt her hand involuntarily reach for the keyboard. She pressed the next button, without fully realizing what would happen next. A new message appeared on the screen. Are you afraid? Are you afraid to see what will happen if you don't complete the task? What the hell? Lisa whispered softly. She didn't know if this was truly a message from the game or something else. Then suddenly, her own photo appeared on the screen. It had been taken recently, right when she hadn't yet pressed the button. Every detail of her face was clearly visible, as if the camera had been watching her every move. The sound of a doorbell made them all turn. Everyone fell silent, Lisa's heart heavy as a stone. Someone was standing behind the door. She stood up, trying not to show any emotion, not revealing her fear. Mika was already approaching the door when suddenly, the screen on his computer flashed. A message appeared. Don't open. Who is it? Lisa asked, her voice barely breaking through the stress. Mika, don't open it. But it was already too late. Mika slowly opened the door, and they saw only a shadow in the doorway. No one was there. They all stared at him in confusion, but everything changed in an instant. Within seconds, they heard a sound echoing from the walls. This isn't just a game, Lisa whispered, as the shadow began to move into the room, stretching across the walls, as if something invisible was approaching. Suddenly, their computer screens began to flicker, and on each of them appeared a list of their friends' names, with serious warnings. If you do not complete the task, one of you will die. Their faces went pale, their lips dry. Fear began to turn into despair. Could they really die? But there was nothing they could do. Meanwhile, the door suddenly slammed shut. One of their friends, Jeff, began typing something on his laptop. Lisa looked up as she saw his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard, as if he was trying to find a way out. But her instincts were right. He wasn't himself. His eyes had become hollow, his hand trembled, and he couldn't stop. At that very second, the computer froze. Meanwhile, Lisa watched as the screens on their computers began to fill up. Clearly, these weren't ordinary tasks. Kill. A message appeared on the screen. You must kill the one who will betray you. This wasn't just a request. It was an order. Lisa looked at her friends. This was no longer a joke. They all knew they couldn't choose anything but to complete these tasks. And suddenly, in front of her eyes, a photo appeared again. This time, it was of her. But this wasn't an ordinary photo. It looked as though her body was starting to decay, as if a part of her soul had already left this world. No! She screamed. This can't be real. We have to stop this. But it was all in vain. And this game, which they once thought was just a joke, already had them under its control. They had become part of a nightmare that couldn't be stopped or destroyed. They were already dead, they just didn't know it yet. Each of them was like a ghost, trapped in the very heart of a nightmare that offered no moment of peace. Under the pressure of horrifying tasks and relentless, anxious messages, they no longer felt like humans. They had become part of this terrifying world, existing only within the boundaries of their computer screens. And all they did was follow orders. Lisa couldn't shake the thought that they had become the objects of the game, not its players. Every move, every decision they made, was under the strict control of this soulless entity that seemed to live within the program's code. Was it some sort of demonic force? And why had they been chosen? These questions pounded in her head as she sat at her computer, helplessly waiting for the next task. And then a message appeared on the screen. Someone must die. You choose. All eyes turned to Mika. This was no accident. They knew the game hadn't just left them with a choice. It had chosen someone to die. Mika sat quietly, his eyes hollow. His body shook from nerves, but he didn't speak a word. He didn't even turn around as his friends stared at him, their eyes full of fear and hatred. We can't just cancel it, can we? He said, sounding eerily calm, more so than he should have been. It's a survival game, and we're part of this horrible machine. Lisa couldn't believe he had accepted it so easily. Her heart ached in pain. She started to feel her body losing control. They were all trapped, and there was no way back. Now that fear had become real, the mind couldn't fight anymore. We have to stop this. Lisa cried out, her hands trembling with despair. We have to find a way out of this game. But then a new message appeared on the screen. You cannot escape. You cannot avoid your fate. All the gazes returned to the computers. Felt like a curse. They knew everything happening was real. Every action had consequences. They saw the lines between the game and reality blur, and now they couldn't even tell if they still had a chance for salvation. And then, at that moment, as they sat in the room, staring intently at their monitors, Mika's screen flashed brighter than the others. It turned out that once again, he was ordered to act. Choose. Kill someone, or die yourself. Lisa's heart raced even faster as she saw Mika's photo appear on the screen, one of the most horrifying images she had ever seen. It was a photo taken only seconds ago. And though his body looked healthy, there were terrifying signs that something was wrong. Mika, Lisa began, but her words froze on her lips as she saw him start typing something on the keyboard. This is the end. I can't leave you alive unless I do this. And then everything changed. The camera on his computer began showing strange footage. These were not real-time recordings. They were visions. They saw death. They saw themselves dead, each one of them. Bodies in dark, shabby rooms. Wet, bloody shards. And in each of these visions stood that invisible force. It was there, lurking, watching them, as if this nightmare was just a small piece of its plan. Lisa felt her own hands grow cold as the screen suddenly showed another frame. It was her, standing before her friends, a knife in her hand, and her eyes were empty. She was forced to kill. Despair mixed with fear as they realized killing was the only way to stay alive. But who would do it? And would they be able to refuse this senseless choice? Just once? Mika, slowly turning his head to the others, spoke with a cold sense. This isn't just a game. This is the end. He pressed the enter key, and they all felt something die within their souls. A chilling silence enveloped the room. And suddenly, it became clear. There was no way to win this game. Only death. Mika was the last to press enter, and his eyes, empty of pain and fear, never left the screen. Everything around them froze. It felt as though the very air had become heavy, like stone, and their bodies had turned limp. Then the screen flashed again, displaying a horrifying scene. Each of them saw the others on the brink, ready for something terrible to happen. The choice has been made, a cold voice declared from the speakers, as if it were the face of the game itself. Lisa felt her breath catch for a moment. She saw the screens flicker, and each of them began displaying terrifying images of their fears, their greatest nightmares. These were not just memories or hallucinations. This was real, dreadful foresight. Then, another message appeared on the screen. Someone must die. The choice is yours. No. Lisa screamed, overwhelmed by the sense that she no longer controlled the situation. This can't be true. We can't go on like this. But it was too late. Jeff, sitting nearby, suddenly began to move. He grabbed a chair beside him and violently broke it in two. Everyone recoiled in fear as he turned toward them with a wild look in his eyes. He was on the edge, his eyes bloodshot, and his body trembling with tension. "It's your fault," Jeff shouted, his voice like a roar that tore through the room. He lifted a part of the chair, ready to strike someone. "I can't take this anymore. You're all part of this nightmare." Lisa watched in horror as his hands began to shake, and then, without hesitation, he lunged at Mika. It happened so quickly that none of them had time to react. Mika tried to defend himself, but his arms were weak, and Jeff, blinded by despair, grabbed him by the throat. They all silently watched the scene, unsure of what to do. "No!" Lisa cried, jumping forward, trying to stop Jeff, but he had already lost control. A terrible fire burned in his eyes, and he couldn't hear her. Mika, feeling his chest tighten, began fighting for his life, but it was in vain. Everyone in the room could see how he lacked strength, how his face grew paler, and his eyes became dimmer. Suddenly, the screen on Mika's computer flickered. All eyes turned to him. On the screen appeared a photo of Mika, but now his gaze was hollow. Everyone saw it. This was his final reflection, his last moment before death came for him. And when he finally gave in, when his body stopped moving, the sound on the screen became quiet and empty. Jeff, tossing Mika's lifeless body aside, stood there with a cold expression on his face. His fingers still tightly gripped the chair fragments, but he said nothing. Then, on each of their screens appeared a brief but deadly serious message. "Now you've made your choice. One of you is already dead. And this was just the beginning. Lisa stood in shock, her blood freezing in her veins. She couldn't believe everything she had seen was real. Mika was dead. He had been just like them before this nightmare of a game began. It was necessary to survive, Jeff said, his voice sounding nothing like it had before. Now it was just an empty shell of a person who had lost their humanity. Lisa felt her legs begin to buckle beneath her. She had to make a choice, accept this as reality, or try to escape this trap. The only thought spinning in her head was, could any of them survive until the end of this game? But then, suddenly, a new message appeared on the screens, even more terrifying than the last. You cannot escape. One of you will die next. The game has only just begun. Lisa screamed, her voice tearing through the silence of the room. She couldn't hold herself back any longer. This was no longer just a game. This was death, and they were at the center of this hell. Lisa, pressing her hands to her face, felt her heart break with pain and despair. They had lost a friend. Mika was no longer with them. His death was not an accident. It was the result of their choice, and although that choice had been dictated by the game, it left a deep mark on each of them. Jeff stood silently, his face empty, his hands still trembling with fear. He showed no emotion, no remorse, no pain. He simply stood there, staring at the empty space where Mika had been just moments ago. It was horrifying, but he felt nothing. Lisa looked at the screen. The messages wouldn't stop. Do you think you can escape this? Someone will die in an hour. Time is running out. We have to do something. Lisa exclaimed, her voice, though filled with anger, still held hope. She turned to the others. We can stop this. We can find a way to break free. But even she didn't believe her own words. Her heart pounded so hard that she could hardly breathe. There was no turning back now, and with each passing minute, they were getting closer to becoming part of this nightmare forever. Suddenly, the screen on Lisa's laptop flickered brighter, and a new message appeared. Now the choice becomes even harder. You will have to kill to survive. Only one can remain. The choice is yours. This isn't true, Lisa screamed, feeling all her nerves snap. She looked up and saw Jeff that he was calm, but his eyes were gleaming. Something had changed in him. His hands no longer trembled, his face had turned grim, and Lisa realized that something had taken over him, a demon that was controlling him. This is a survival game, Lisa, he said, his voice low and cold, and you already know who the next one should be. No. Her heart was ready to explode with terror. We can escape. We have to find a way. This isn't our fault. But once again, a new image appeared on the screen. This time, it was horrifying. She saw herself, sprawled on the floor, blood leaking from her body onto the ground. Her own eyes stared at herself with a dead gaze. You can't escape this, Jeff whispered. It's already a part of us. And you know that. And then Lisa saw it. The screen showed an image of their house, but it was not as she remembered it. It was abandoned, with dark stains on the walls. She saw a shadow moving across the room. It was something big, black, and terrifying. She knew it was the same thing manipulating them, making them kill each other. This is not just a game. This is our death, she said softly, but her words echoed like a funeral bell. With a sudden movement, Jeff lunged at her. She didn't even have time to react when he grabbed her by the throat and squeezed. Lisa tried to free herself, her hands pushing against him, but his strength was unimaginable. She felt the air leave her lungs, her whole body growing heavy and powerless. Her vision blurred, and in the last moment before the darkness took over, she saw the screen on the laptop flashing again. A message appeared. The final task is complete. One of you is dead. Only one will remain. The game ends. And in that moment, Lisa felt her body stop fighting. It seemed as though her life had crossed over, and all that remained was an image on the screen, a shadow of her existence. The darkness that consumed Lisa left only emptiness, which absorbed her last breath. Jeff, feeling her body grow heavier, did not stop. No, he only felt the cold fear and emptiness wrapping around his mind. Lisa was dead, but why? Why her? And what had become of him after he betrayed them all? He pushed her lifeless body away and stood up. The shadow of the invisible monster, which hid their souls, continued to reach toward him. And on the screen, which never stopped shining, a new message appeared. You betrayed. But there is still a chance. One of you will remain alive. Jeff stood, staring at the screen where the cold phrase flickered. There is still a chance. He no longer believed this was just a game. It was a trap, a net with no way out, but he wasn't going to let it go without consequences. His mind was torn, but not broken. Well, if this was a chance, he was ready to take it. Meanwhile, Sandra, sitting at the other end of the room, looked at all of this with horror and hopelessness. She was the only one left who had not died, but her soul was empty. She couldn't understand why all of this was happening. And worst of all, she knew it wouldn't stop. They were no longer human. They were parts of this horrible machine. I can't take it anymore. I can't endure this, Sandra whispered, her hands trembling with despair. Everyone in the room began to glance at each other, observing every movement. Could they still change anything? What if this game no longer had a beginning or an end? And suddenly, a new message appeared on the screen. Time's up. The next victim. Hearing these words, Sandra felt her heart go numb. She saw Jeff raise his head and look at her. There was no pity in his gaze, only indifference. They all understood. It was the end. The end for one of them. Jeff took a few steps toward her, his movements deliberate, with some horrific determination. He was approaching Sandra, and she could feel his cold gaze. Was he the one who would remain alive? Or was this his final attempt to escape the inevitable? Sandra took a final step back, and her gaze became truly desperate. She tried to run, but Jeff was fast. He gripped her hands with his strong fingers. She felt the pressure on her neck, her voice muffled. I don't want to do this, Sandra whispered as the image of her friends reappeared before her eyes. They had died because of her choice, but she couldn't turn back time. Her mind was already trying to find an escape, but there was one unpleasant reality: the game was too powerful now. And when she looked at Jeff, she realized she wouldn't be able to stop him. And then, just as Sandra began to lose consciousness from the pressure, the screen suddenly flickered again. This time, there was no text. Only a bright light that burned away all thoughts and turned each moment into madness. She lifted her head and saw how Jeff abruptly dropped her body to the floor. His expression had changed. Now, on the screen reflecting their final moments, only one thing was clear. Jeff was the one who remained alive. She couldn't believe her eyes. He remained. But how? Was this part of the game? Or was there no way out, no salvation left? And then darkness overtook her. In the final moment, Sandra understood. The game would never end. She had become part of this nightmare that was now consuming each one of them. Jeff remained alive, but it cost him his entire soul. Now, he was nothing more than a zombie, possessed by the game that had killed his spirit. Jeff stood in the darkness, his eyes merciless and empty. He was no longer the person he had once been. And though he had survived, it didn't feel like a victory. There was no longer room in his soul for doubt, regret, or even pain. He was part of this game, its final, living part. The darkness filled the room, and only the flickering light of the computer screen illuminated his reflection. The message on the screen had changed, this time showing just one short line: the game is over. Jeff stared at the message, and in his chest, there was no sense of relief or triumph. He wasn't a winner. He was a remnant of a past tragedy. He gathered himself to stand, but felt his legs betray him again. Everything inside him reminded him of emptiness. How could he have forgotten? Everything had been so clear when they first started the game. And now, as it ended, he was only its shadow. Games don't just destroy lives. They take souls, pull them out of reality. Jeff stepped out of the room, but the world before him had no more colors. It was an empty corridor with blurred shadows. His footsteps rang like the echo of lost time. And every movement felt like a step into the unknown, a place he could no longer enter consciously. And there, at the end of the corridor, appeared a shadow. A shadow that resembled the recently deceased Lisa. Her eyes were as merciless as his own. You can't escape this. Her voice came from the depths of fear itself. She was here again, but it was only part of the game, her cruel, reflected essence. Jeff glanced at her. She was part of his choice, and now they were both parts of this endless nightmare. He felt his mind beginning to dissolve, as Lisa's face merged with other shadows. The choice was made, Jeff whispered, his voice calm, but there was no life in it. What followed was only infinity, madness that now consumed him. He felt the deep darkness closing in on him from all sides. It couldn't be avoided. This wasn't just a nightmare, it was his new world, and he could never leave it. In the end, Jeff became just another shadow in the vast emptiness. The game had taken all their souls, turning them into parts of this horrific cycle. And the screen, which had become the place of their final game, flickered out. And once again, there was only darkness. Only shadows. And so, they remained, merciless, soulless, immortalized in the game's reality, where there would never be an end. And so, as darkness once again envelopes you, we say goodbye, but not for long. Remember, the night is never truly safe. Subscribe so you don't miss the new horrors, and come back when it's time for new nightmares. Beware of the shadows, they are always near. Until next time.